All right, we are recording, and today we are going to talk about primarily body image, but it's going to play in, it's going to have kind of tendrils that connect a whole bunch of different stuff. And as I build this kind of picture, we're going to workshop a couple of different things. So I'm going to workshop some stuff with Anastasia. I'm going to workshop some stuff with Pierre that he shared in our coaching group. And I've been workshopping some things with Dave and some of my other clients as well. So I'm sure they'll bring some things up as we go through this. And I think it's just going to be really, really cool for you guys. So what I wanted to start with was kind of this idea of, and I'm trying to build this into a framework so that you guys have a system that you can follow for breaking down your beliefs in the same way that I do on my, in the way that I'm going to share today. So when I sat down to figure out how to teach a body image session, I sat down and said, okay, how would I pick apart my own awareness in terms of body image? And I wanted to be able to take that formula and teach you guys that formula so you can apply that to all different spectrums of belief and operation. And I kind of do that a little bit, but a lot of what I realized was I process a tremendous amount of information without needing to do this process. So what I wanted to do is say, okay, how much of this process how much of this stuff can I write down so someone else can see my thought process a little bit better? Because it is a little bit different. And Anastasia was telling me, she's like, I don't think that way at all. So I'm hoping that I can help you guys come up with some new tools to be able to process this information. So she's also has this little card of colors that she's going to flip upside down so that I know to stop so she can ask her questions.
Because if you've been here for any length of time, you notice that when he starts going, it's just like, and there's no like, can I? So I'm going to see if I can hopefully give him some cues to be like, hold on, there might be some questions. To make it a little bit more interactive throughout the whole thing instead of saving it all for the end. So just knowing that that's what we're doing is good.
All right, so I want to start with just the baseline belief. So one of the things I want you to realize is that when we're tracking our beliefs, whether it's about body image or it's about money or it's about our relationships or it's about just certain specific interactions or nuanced beliefs that are coming up, we always have access to one of two things. Either we have access to the emotion, which can lead us to the belief, or we have access to the belief, which can lead us to the emotion. And so we can use either one of those indicators at the top level to allow us to step down those beliefs to the more nuanced and specific areas of operation that our system is operating on. So what I wanted to start with was, when we look at our body image, the first thing, one of the first kind of baseline beliefs is, I wish I looked like I used to, or I miss looking like I used to. So what you're doing is you're looking at a frame of reference in your past and saying, I believed I looked better then. And then what we have to do from here is start to assess all the different pieces of that belief. So when we say, I wish I looked better, like I wish I looked like I used to, one, you're attributing a quality to what you look like, which means better. What is better? Have you defined what better actually means? Does that mean your old body image was seen as better because it was more attractive? Did you see more fit as more attractive? Did you see maybe you lost a lot of weight and you saw curvier as more attractive? And so what we want to start to break down is the specifics within what we are actually unconsciously defining these different words as. So right now we have better, and we can assess what better means to us in terms of our body. We can also assess what more attractive means in terms of our body, and whether it still holds the same kind of weight that our idea of it held back when we first established that initial benchmark. So when we look at attractive, you know, we used to be more lean maybe, and maybe we say, if you're a fitness coach or you're a movement coach, you're like, well, if I'm not as lean as I was before, then I'm not qualified as a coach and people won't hire me. And so there's a lot of layers of how these things start to come about because of our mental processes around these beliefs. And what I want you to see through this is how I'm stepping through the process of picking these things apart so that when you go to evaluate your own body image beliefs, you can kind of follow that from the top level down. And hopefully just in general, you'll relate to this as well, since most people all have that feeling, at least to some extent. The thing we want to ask at any of these stages. So when we say, if I say my old body image was better, we have to always ask ourselves, is it? Is it really? Was it really better? Because a lot of times we just say it's better and we operate on that preconceived notion, but we haven't actually evaluated in terms of what is our goal up front? What are we trying to achieve by being more attractive? And what is the energy of attraction that we are trying to embody within the belief structure that we were operating on before? And is that belief structure effective in giving us the outcome that we're asking for? So if I believe that my old self was more attractive and my new self or my current self is less attractive, then my perception is going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm going to see things in my life that prove to me that I used to be more attractive. And that becomes what ends up happening is people want to see themselves as attractive first, and then they hope that those other layers shift. But we have to understand that what we are seeing is already the result of those underlying beliefs that have been running and create a proving mechanism through the fact that those actually exist in the first place. So then we start to question these things. We said, we have on one level that being fit is more attractive. And then we have to ask, is fit more attractive? And then we have to say, who is it more attractive to? Let's say that we have either a partner that we already have, or we have a potential partner, or no partner, but we're looking for a partner. The thing we want to ask is, does society's view of what is attractive really matter? Or is having the person that we are in front of seeing us as attractive the thing that matters to us? Now, we can't control someone else's perception, but there's a lot of layers that influence the co-creation of our perception of them and their perception of us. And what I mean by that is we effectively, let me see, I wrote that somewhere else. We perceive others in direct proportion to how attractive we see ourselves. And so if we are having issues with our own body image, or we're not seeing ourselves at our best, well, then we struggle to, on a lot of levels, make eye contact with the people that we're communicating with, not because we're afraid of being seen in general, but because we're afraid that people will see us through our eyes, through our lenses, right? So if we see ourselves through this disempowered state, then we're afraid other people will see us through our eyes in that disempowered state. And so that gets projected, and then we see them through our eyes in the same way that we see ourselves through our eyes. And we see them as less attractive than they really are, because we're really, in a lot of ways, being mirrored back the way that we actually perceive ourselves and hiding from that. So when we ask, is fit more attractive, we want to then say, attractive to who? Is it attractive to society, or is it attractive to my partner? And what does my partner find attractive? Are they attracted just to my physical form, without realizing that physical form is going to change throughout our lifetime for the purpose of teaching different types of lessons to our soul? And so we have changes in our physiology intentionally because of the way that our beliefs manifest through our physical body. Those change and surface in that way because of the beliefs that we hold, as a mechanism to show us where those beliefs are structured and held, and where we can actually shift some of those underlying programs so that our physical body matches what we think it should. So we have to then, we start to look at, is gaining a little bit of weight, having a little bit of softness or whatever that we generally judge as let's say we judge it as unhealthy. But when we actually examine what is healthy, what kind of signals does our body give us when we aren't healthy? Well, when we're unhealthy, maybe we don't have energy. We're low energy. We're fatigued all the time. Maybe our body hurts. Maybe we have other physical symptoms of like histamine reactions and stress, and you have skin that's breaking out, or you have detox symptoms, or you have other aches and pains and things that show up in your body. We have signals that our body will show us when we are healthy versus when we are not. And when we examine how our body feels and the things that are coming up, we want to look in context, because we have a lot of conflicting beliefs around what these things what society tells us that this means, and what society tells us we look like, versus what our soul is telling us through our individual experience. So, is it possible that a little fat is actually healthier? Well, there are plenty of places, especially in men and women, that say you need some body fat to be able to have the proper hormonal output. Now, we want to understand what the body does in that structure of belief, which could imply that your body is, maybe it's just gaining a little bit of weight temporarily so it can feel safe. So if you are constantly afraid of your food, and I'm going to get into, yeah, that's the next piece. That'll be really good too. So when our body hurts in certain areas, or it has certain disease states that are showing up, and if you've been here the last couple of weeks, you've seen how I've tied a lot of that to the multidimensional anatomy, how that ties into your organ systems, how the cellular consciousness through the body of your beliefs start to collect into group consciousnesses that form your organs, and how those things then manifest into your physical body. Well, if you have these different beliefs around health versus unhealth, and you have these different beliefs around being lean versus not lean, being attractive versus unattractive, well, then you're going to be able to trace those to different disease states, which will give you the emotional information that we need to process, which will then lead us to the actual root beliefs that are causing your body to manifest in that way, to give you the lessons and the signals that we want to learn. So if your body is gaining some weight, it might just be that it's healing. Sometimes your body feels safer in gaining weight, whether that's muscle mass that feels like armor, or it gains weight to keep other things away. If you had like sexual violation or any of those kinds of things, a lot of times our body will gain weight just to make us feel safe. And so there's a lot of layers of how these things are going to show up. So we have a lot, when we look at how our body is manifesting, there's a really strong tie to nutrition, about how our body processes food, how our body processes our beliefs around what food does to our body. And there's a lot of layers to this. So if we subconsciously feel unsafe in our diet, meaning, so actually, I'll read this first and then I'll go deeper. So if you subconsciously feel unsafe in your diet, or your body might gain weight, filtering the so-called food toxins into fat that might otherwise be easily processed. So if you are eating sugar, and on one hand, you have a belief that that carbohydrate and sugar is your body's primary fuel source. On the other hand, you have a belief that sugar is poisonous and causes cancer. Both of those beliefs can coexist and create conflicting results within your physiology. And so if you believe that that's your main fuel source, but part of you is still pouring energy into that, oh, am I poisoning myself? Well, guess what happens? Your body says, oh, well, I'm giving myself my main fuel source, so I'm getting some energy, but I also think this stuff might be bad for me. So let me have my body process that and store that sugar and those toxins in fat so that I can be safe from something that might be dangerous. And so your body starts processing that information a little bit differently. Whether you believe that, if you believe that veganism is the healthiest way to eat, and then you go to look at other foods, well, your body is going to process that food, energy, and information through the lens of your beliefs at the most fundamental levels. So if you think this is nourishing and healthy, your body will react to that food as though it is nourishing and healthy and give you the physiological image of what you believe nourishing and healthy looks like. So if you have conflicting beliefs and you don't believe that nourished and healthy actually is a full body, you believe it's a super lean, muscular, deprived body in some ways, well, then you're going to be eating this stuff and also feel healthy and unhealthy at the same time because of how your body is trying to sort through and balance those beliefs on the cellular level. So if you believe you are surrounded by invisible toxins and poisons, you will also load your body with an insurmountable quantity to process. So think about this. There's so much work, especially in like holistic health communities. And even I've talked about this stuff a lot, about killing parasites and about detoxing, about clearing heavy metals, about being afraid of smart dust, about the things that we inhale in our water supply being dirty and our air being dirty. And all these things that are really pumped into us all the time, that our world is unsafe, that we are constantly breathing in poisons. And two, our body does not have has a limited capacity and is always at less than its capacity to be able to process that stuff that it's eating or that it's inhaling. So our body is always innately unhealthy 100% of the time because the world is poisoning us with these toxins and things that we can't see. And so our body manifests that because we believe in the truth of that collectively. And so there's a lot of things that we need to work through in terms of the beliefs around the environment that we live in being not only poisonous, but so poisonous beyond the capability of our body to process those toxins and poisons. And now that gets bled into food, that gets bled into what we eat, that gets bled into how we live. And now we're afraid of food, we're afraid of our water, we're afraid of all of these things that are meant to be actually healing and nourishing to our body. Even if what we're eating we believe is the healthiest thing in the world, we always have that little bit of belief that says some of this stuff is contaminated. Our body is inadequate. And that inadequacy is going to manifest on the surface of how our body interacts with those things. And so our body will look unhealthy. It will feel restricted. It will have all these issues as a result of our belief that it is incapable of doing what it needs to do to process the things coming through it. Now, if we shift that belief, we begin then to ask and say, is my body capable of actually processing toxins? It has 7 elimination channels that it can use to get rid of stuff that needs to not be in the body. It has all of those systems in place to be able to do that. It is our beliefs and our emotional stagnations and our traumas and things that inhibit the function of each of those elimination channels that cause the belief that our body is inadequate to surface in our organs, to surface in our body. And so we want to then step back and say, well, is my body actually capable? And has it shown me to be quite capable in spite of all of these things they say are issues? And when I was a kid, when all these things were happening, is it the fact that when I was a kid, either it was building in my system and I'm not seeing the result till now? Or is it the fact that as I was a kid, I didn't believe or know about that stuff, and so it wasn't actually affecting my physiology? Versus the children who have parents who are talking about this all the time are having these physiological autoimmune and other symptoms that are surfacing just as a result of these beliefs that are being anchored in us, and then our bodies manifesting in the physical based on those underlying programs. And so if you are constantly believing in that inherent toxicity, your body knows to say, okay, if I need to protect myself from toxicity and my elimination pathways don't work, I have fat that I can use to store those toxins, and I can lock that fat in a compartment and never let that out, because if I do, my body can't handle it and it's always going to be sick. And so then you start gaining weight because you don't feel safe. You're always saying, oh, well, the government is threatening this. They say there's this symptomless virus and there's this There's all these things to be afraid of that we can't see, and we need to be afraid of them, and we need to be careful because our body is not adequate and it's insufficient to be able to process this virus. It's insufficient to be able to process these toxins. It's insufficient to be able to digest this food. It's insufficient to be able to be a living human without all of these other mechanisms that prove to you that you're inadequate as a person. That then shows up in your physical body. And so you then have your belief in how you look is in conflict with your belief in your body's lack of intelligence and its innate toxic overload. So our cellular intelligence is on its own is extraordinarily intelligent. Its ability to do complex mathematical processes that in real time that tell your cells how to communicate telepathically, how to exchange energy, how to live. All of these things are happening at a level that is controlled by aspects of us that we do not need to be aware of. And so we can trust that our cells are extraordinarily intelligent at fulfilling what our belief structure says it should be fulfilling. And so our cells are living the life of our beliefs. They die and then reincarnate, carrying those beliefs through, constantly returning that energy to the system that's being outpictured through our energy centers. And so if we can recognize those things and begin to get back down to those lowest levels of both belief and energy, we can start to change those symbolic imprints and balance those structures so that the cellular consciousness that is living within us is operating on beliefs and empowerment that are more in line with what we want things to look like. And so one of the other things that ends up happening is when we believe our body is inherently ill, we start to see these people on social media, whether it's like, like in fitness world, you have like Ben Greenfield or Dave Asprey or any of these biohacking people who are saying, hey, I'm super healthy. Look at me and all the things that I do. Follow the things that I do. If you don't do all of these things, you might not be healthy. And so they're pitching extraordinarily expensive treatments. They're buying all kinds of expensive supplements. And then you come in, you're saying, well, I'm not a millionaire. How am I going to afford all of these fancy treatments just so I can be healthy? And so you have this belief that, okay, well, I have this imaginary amount of money that I need to grab to be able to afford the things that allow me to be healthy. And if not, I'm unworthy of health. I haven't achieved the things that I need to achieve in order to be healthy and valid as a human. And I need all of these outside saviors to make sure that I can be healthy and empowered. And so what that does is that makes you have this feeling that you need all of this money, you need all this outside service to make you healthy and whole. And you feel then unsafe and unworthy and inherently unhealthy and restricted as a conflict with those underlying beliefs that are shown to us. So let me see what I'm at. Okay, so when we look at our own physical attraction, what I want you to start seeing through kind of what I've been building here is that our body image is tied not only to what we want things to look like, it's tied to what we think things should look like. It's tied to the societal programs that we operate on. It's tied to what we eat and what we believe that food is doing for us, what we believe that food is helping us heal. Where did I write that? I'll get to that later. So it's tied to a lot of different pieces of how we interact with everybody. So our body image is tied to our partners. It's tied to what we believe they perceive through our eyes. Our fear of eye contact especially shows up in our willingness to be seen for who we are. and the less worthy we feel for who we are, and the less, the more we compare ourselves to other versions of self, the harder it is for us to show up in our present moment point of power, which is as you are. And from this point, as you are, we can reframe those beliefs. We can look at the negative side of those beliefs and start to balance the power along the spectrum that those beliefs live within. So the thing that we want to do is stop. One of the things that animals do really well, and is if an animal understands illness. If an animal gets sick, it doesn't wonder why it got sick. It doesn't wonder what it did to deserve its illness. It doesn't wonder what its beliefs were that manifested that illness. It sees an illness and immediately begins to remedy the situation. Whereas a human, because we have that extra energy center in our rational mind, we then take that instinctual information, that emotional information, we then process and make decisions on it and weigh the different pieces of information saying, okay, why did this happen? The problem with that, and so there's a benefit and a problem with that. The challenge is when we start to over process that information, we get stuck spooling in that information instead of actually making the choices that allow us to move forward out of it, which is really the goal. We believe that processing that information and looking backward for connection is what also moves us forward out of that inherent program that we're running. But that isn't the case. Those are two separate points of energy. And so when we have illness, what animals do is they kind of, because they operate purely on their first two energy centers, the animals operate instinctively. They use their instinctive mind in reference to their frame of reference. They get ill and they assume, okay, if I'm healthy, I'm in the right place at the right time. If I'm unhealthy, I'm in the wrong place at this time. So I'm going to move into the right place. And so they immediately move into the right place as opposed to evaluating all the reasons that the place they're in is wrong. As a human, we can do both of those things to our benefit, which means we want to be able to move forward from where we are. So if you don't like how your body looks or you're having body image issues in terms of gaining weight, well, we now have a lot of information that we can use to sort through the beliefs that we hold around how our body should actually be operating in our current moment point of power and moving forward from there. So the thing we want to do is stop wondering what we did to get into a situation and instead examine our beliefs about the situation itself. So I'm going to say that again because it's a really important one. Stop wondering what you did to get into a situation and instead examine your beliefs about the situation itself. So if we are always wondering what we did to get into it, we're assuming that it was about what we did, our actions that we took that caused us to land in a situation we didn't want. But it's not about the actions that we took. It is about the beliefs we have about the situation and how those beliefs align with something that we were, through that energy, asking to be shown. As a learning mechanism, as a means of just showing us the energy that we're outputting as a feedback mechanism. And so as we examine our beliefs about our current situation, so if we're at home and we're saying, well, I should really be making more money, so I should be working harder. Well, you're looking at what you did to get into your current situation. You're saying, well, I have this much money, I must not be working hard enough. If I was working harder, I would have made more money by now and I would be more worthy. The truth is, you have beliefs about your current situation as unworthy, as not enough, as insufficient. And so your life creates the scenario around that to make you feel that way in your current position. So let's look at good and illness in terms of good and evil. because a lot of times we hold illness in the framework of good and evil. We hold body image in the framework of good and evil. And that framework can be really disempowering because of how vague it is. So on one hand, health is glorified and illness is seen as a moral stigma. If you see yourself as an aspect of God, then you would see your illness as a moral stigma and think that you are wrong as a unit of being. Just because you've been getting sick, you must be wrong. You must be doing something wrong. You must be insufficient. And what that does is that creates all kinds of other layers of program that start to happen in our life. On the other hand, you can see illness as a learning process. So when you get ill, you ask, what am I learning from this? What belief do I have that is causing this illness to manifest? The problem with that, and the problem with both of these, they can run into extremes. So if we see all of our illness as a learning experience, we end up glorifying suffering. We end up confusing suffering and sickness with saintliness. And so there's a lot of that in plant medicine. There's a lot of that in psychedelics. There's a lot of that in people who are showing up to do the work, believing that suffering and that struggle and that emoting nonstop is a signal that you are being saintly. You then demonstrate the strength of your spirituality by how much you are suffering and how sick you are. So it's important to recognize the extremes of how this starts to show up. We choose how much we suffer based on our point of view of our current moment experience. Whether that's how we look at our body, whether that's how we look at our body through what we think our partner thinks of our body, whether that's how we look at our food, whether that's how we look at our money, whether that's how we look at our career, all of those different aspects are going to be created through that lens of good and evil. And that lens of good and evil does not need to exist as it currently exists for you. If we still have amorphous definition within us in terms of what we think is good and what we think is evil, we then put ourselves and our bodies into that template and weigh our body against this imaginary version of good and evil, worthiness or unworthiness. When we look at money, we can do the same thing. We can say wealth is a moral virtue. You can either say that poverty is a lack of morality and then look down on poor people, or you can say that poverty is virtuous and that wealth creates guilt, or it causes wealth to create guilt. And so I think a lot of folks who have money issues in general tend to have this guilt tied to actually making money, because spirituality a lot of times is misprogrammed into minimalism, into needing to rescue the planet, needing to do all of these things that are self-sacrifice that say, I want this thing, but I'm not supposed to want it because it's bad to want it. And so by doing that, you end up creating this virtuosity in your poverty and the scarcity energy that you are calling spirituality. And you then hold on to that, and it shows up in how you make money. It shows up in how you make decisions. It shows up in how you are building your programs. All of these different things start to manifest out of that. So the thing that's really, really, really important about all of these factors is that the individual experience is forgotten. If you can remember your individual experience as unique to you, meaning your beliefs were imprinted as a learning template from your parents when you were younger, that learning template is something that is really important to you when you're a child, but it is necessary and natural to reevaluate that template and those beliefs that you adopted as you get older. Because you have more information, you have more awareness, and you can say, yeah, my parents thought that eating before 5 p.m. was evil. And as I've grown up, I've seen a lot of people eating after 5 p.m. and they all seem really happy and great. So I think that belief is inadequate. And so you can start to shift a lot of those underlying programs simply by reevaluating what you've kind of held as a fact in terms of your interaction, in terms of how you've operated up until that point. So the thing a lot of times what happens is, I'll look through that. Okay. The thing that we want to do in any of these beliefs, when these beliefs come up, and we always have access to our surface level beliefs. There's the belief that we don't have access to that, or that this stuff is hard to find, is why you have trouble finding these things. So the more you can understand that your subconscious is accessible to you, your belief structures are accessible to you. Maybe you didn't know the path to take to find them, but that doesn't mean that this stuff is scary or inaccessible or any of these kinds of things that we are taught to be afraid of. We're taught to be afraid of our own thoughts. We're taught to be afraid of our own consciousness, because bad thoughts generate the things that we don't want. Or if I'm judging my own body and I'm thinking about the things that I judge and I'm processing that information, I'm just going to make it worse. I'm going to just, as I'm looking at myself, I'm going to get fatter just because I'm looking at the things that I judge about my body. And that's not true. The belief that that's true is what makes that true for you. And so if we can start to reevaluate a lot of those things by finding conflicting data, the same thing that I did a second ago when I said, well, eating after 5, my parents said eating after 5 o'clock is the devil's work. And then I found conflicting data. I said, all these people eat after 5 o'clock and they're perfectly fine and they're happy. And they're all these variables that I say are not that qualify to my belief as not evil. Well, now I found conflicting data points, and that conflicting data helps me to balance that rhythm in that noise on each of those different segments of my system. So that allows us to regulate our awareness simply by practicing finding conflicting data. So if we, and this will work for everything for, COVID as well. So when you have preconceived notions about any of that stuff that comes up, what we want to do is find that conflicting data so that we can come to our own conclusions and held beliefs that are empowering to our ability to interact with the things that we interact with on a daily basis. So if we are finding that our relationships are having that we're hiding in a certain way in our relationships, well, we want to be able to, in real time, begin to evaluate the parts of us that we are hiding, that we're afraid to look at, that we're afraid to acknowledge, that we are telling a story about in terms of what we think their perception is, so that we can start to then say, oh, I'm thinking this thing and I'm hiding in this way. Or maybe you're not consciously thinking this thing, but you can recognize your body's behavior as covering something up or hiding something in some way, or putting yourself in a certain position out of fear of being seen in that position. Then you can start to track your beliefs about the worthiness of what you look like in that position, and the vulnerabilities that you are feeling in that particular position. And so when we examine our age, and age plays into our body image quite a lot, because as we age, not only do we have beliefs about what age means to how our body changes, we have different changes and physiological changes that happen throughout our human lifespan as a mechanism that help us learn other layers. So if we always were very lean our entire life, and then suddenly our body changes from very lean and our metabolic rate changes, well, now we have a lot of new lessons to learn about our attachment to our body and who we were. And we also then say, well, I'm not that person anymore. I'm a different person. And you create a disconnect from your aspects of self that are very much a part of you. So me in this present moment, I have connections to my childhood self. I have connections to my future selves. I have connections to all of those areas in between. And each of those areas has aspects of wisdom and awareness that I can tap into to create a more cohesive whole and embodiment that I can use to kind of step forward. So if we deny the wisdom of our youth, we are actually going to end up missing out on a tremendous amount of things that we can learn from children, that we can learn from our child, our inner child. If we assume that old age falls apart, or our body falls apart or deteriorates as we get older, if we think that we just our metabolism changes as we get older, if we believe that our vision gets worse as we get older, if we believe that our body becomes more restricted and deteriorates as we get older, well, all of those things deny the joy of being that we can actually express at any age. And we can find conflicting data points for all of these things in even just seeing other people who prove that point wrong, who are 70 years old and are still able to move without pain, who are defeating that belief just by demonstrating it to you. And so by seeking out those demonstrations, we can start to find those underlying beliefs that we adopted from our parents, that we adopted from society, that say, oh, that your body's inadequate, that as it gets older, it's going to deteriorate. You have to do all of these things. But even if you do all those things, you're not going to be able to keep up with it. And so we have to then start to reframe that belief to say, well, to part of me that was true. That is a belief that I adopted, but I also see other opportunities within that could be completely different. I also understand from the higher point of view that my beliefs that tied to those words create that outcome. So if I try to tie myself to different beliefs, I can start to create completely different outcomes that can feel much more empowering to me. So if we understand that our ages are all probabilities, they're all probable realities, and they're all simultaneous. So we think of our past and future selves as probabilities and simultaneous, but we forget that our current life operates the same exact way. There is no discontinuity between this life and past lives in terms of our consciousness that cycled through those pulsatile rhythms. When we understand this, we understand that our past and future selves are something that are simultaneous and that we can tap into to gain wisdom, to gain joy, to gain insight into what our body can feel like in different environments. And we can use that proactively to help ourselves show up in a more empowered state. So then you can start to bring, if we deny our age and we act young, we are denying our current state of being. So we don't want to deny our age and act young because people will see right, you've seen people do that, you see right through it. So instead, we want to draw on the qualities that existed in our past and future selves so that we can actually embody the things that we are trying to do. If we have these old age beliefs, we are shutting down our body's abilities. These old age beliefs that say our body depletes, that say our body is going to not be able to produce X, Y, and Z, to say our cells are going to deteriorate. All of these underlying beliefs are going to shut down our body's natural abilities and are going to create that outcome as a result. Let me see if I want to talk about that. Our animals are interesting in that same way. So if you have pets, maybe you'll understand this a little bit. Animals interpret and interact with our beliefs. So they primarily operate instinctually, but because they're interacting in our energy fields, they are going to operate on our energy and belief structures and mirror that back to us. So they're going to mirror your ideas. A young kitten is often treated differently from an older one. And that cat is going to respond to this conditioning in a very distinct way, in the same way that we do. Our own conclusions about age and body image become facts. And so that's really important to see, because then we can start to evaluate what we're saying and what we're trying to improve and why we're trying to improve it. if we're trying to improve something because, oh, I can't look at this, this is bad, I don't want to look at myself in the mirror, I'm going to do all these things not to look at myself, and then I'm going to go to the gym like crazy to make it better, and then once it's better, I'm going to be able to look at myself. Well, that creates a recipe for body dysmorphia very, very quickly, because you end up fixing it maybe at the gym, but you still see through those other lenses. And so as you start to see yourself as you are, you can have a preference that is different from what it is, but it becomes much stronger to develop a preference when you can start to shift the beliefs that you're holding that caused you to generate that preference in the first place. Did you have any comments to any of that? They were in the workshop.
Just kind of taking it all in.
Okay.
Does anyone have?
Well, I can ask that if I want.
Okay.
I was just seeing if you had comments because I wasn't sure which way you wanted to flip it over because it was flipped over already. All right. So a couple of things that we want to look at here when we're looking at body image, and I'm going to get into Pierre's stuff in a second because I think it'll kind of both segue and it'll tie in some of this stuff in a really cool way. You know, yeah, I'll go through Pierre's stuff. So Pierre's talked a handful of times on these chats about this. I'll go over a quick overview of all these things and I'll start to tie it together just so you guys know who he is. And we'll see how these things unfold. So Pierre, what I have here is kind of segments of his story from the time of basically the time of birth through now, more or less, but for the most part up until he was like 19 years old. That established a lot of programs. So one of the things that I work on through color puncture is the traumas that were imprinted the first 25 years of your life. And a lot of times some of these color puncture treatments can bring this information up to the surface. Well, once this information is up at the surface, what do we do with it? You know, if we know these things and we see all these different pieces, we want to then use this information to kind of reevaluate our beliefs so that we can change the structures that these were imprinted for. So we had a lot of experiences from the time that, you know, from the time of conception, and all of that since the time of conception imprints into our limbic system, creating a symbolic structure that operates as a filter that filters all of our perceptions through those traumas, through those events. And then it alters the way that energy flows through our different energy centers as a result. So a lot of the things that I've talked about in terms of sexuality, in terms of body image, in terms of wealth and abundance and poverty and scarcity, all of those tie into our second energy center, our emotional centers. And so we want to understand how the feminine principle in our emotional second center ties into our masculine principle in our throat center, and how those start to interweave and balance each other in a specific way. So one of the things that happened with Pierre when he was born 4 months premature. He was born 4 months premature because he had the umbilical cord around his neck. And so not only was that around his neck, but it was stopping his heart periodically. And they said, we need to pull him out, because if we don't pull him out, both the mother and him are going to be at risk. And so he's pulled out way early. And we have first the imprint of something around his throat chakra. So now we have this closing off of the throat chakra, which is going to diminish some of the masculine principle as he comes into his life. And we're also going to have this overactive, well, I'll get to that later. So he had a C-section with his mother. And so now we have 2 layers of things. We had a layer of this birth trauma, which is going to be a prenatal trauma for him specifically. It'll relate to how he shows up in his career. It'll relate to how he shows up in his relationships. It'll show up in how he interacted with his mother during childhood. And it is all tied to a lot of different things that are going to show up later in his life. And so if he had this happen and his heart was stopping and his mother's life was at risk as a result, well, he then develops an inherent guilt before he was even born. And so if he feels guilty for injuring his mother, for basically saying, instead of me coming the normal way, I'm going to burst out an unnatural way, and I caused all this harm to my mother. Now my mother is sick all the time, and she's depressed, and she has all of these different worries. And because that was my fault, it's my job to make sure that she is safe, that she's protected from those things that I created for her. And so you then start to adopt different behaviors that take on that guilt. And so one of the things that Pierre struggled with during his early childhood was his parents used to fight a lot, and they eventually got divorced. They also moved at different times. And so he took personal responsibility and guilt for the parents fighting and for them having to change locations. And his body manifested symptoms of illness from that underlying guilt, from that underlying unworthiness, from that underlying belief in guilt. And so what he would do is he would use that guilt that would manifest as asthma or eczema, which are both histamine reactions being autoimmune reactions being you fighting yourself, you fighting your own soul, you feeling guilty for something that is artificial guilt, not real guilt. And when we look at real guilt, guilt is really, in its organic state of being, is feedback. I did a thing and got a result I didn't want. Guilt is the reminder that I got a result I didn't want. And that is it. It is not meant to be relived. It is, okay, I touched this hot burner and it was hot. Guilt is me remembering that that was hot last time and I need to do something differently. Guilt is not you stewing in the fact that you're unworthy or that you did something wrong or that you need to make up for who you are. Because if you are not enough, if you haven't done enough good works, if you aren't spiritual enough, you're not going to be safe and protected from whatever these other evils of the world that are out right now that are going to capture you in their net. And so this is a way that we adopt this artificial guilt so that we can heal from the beliefs around that artificial guilt and realize, in the same way that good and evil have this amorphous definition based on what our parents believed good and evil are, well, now we can then reevaluate. What do we see as good and evil? What do we see as guilt? How do we then experience guilt in a more organic way instead of operating on this guilt that we have taken from our birth all the way through our entire life? And that's impacted our relationships. That's impacted where we say yes when we should have said no. That's impacted all of these different areas of our being where our inner truth is diminished because of that underlying guilt. Okay. And so one of the things that he would do when his parents were fighting is he would feel guilty that they were fighting, and he wanted them to experience love as much as he wanted to experience it. So his parents are fighting to get it, and so he to get attention, love, and he would get sick, he would get hurt, he would do things that would make them focus on him instead of them focusing on fighting each other, because of that underlying program that he was running. And so he would use these injuries during times of guilt when he had a desire to do something that was in conflict with what he thought he was supposed to be doing. And so as he goes through his life a little bit, between ages 7 and 13, he was a high-level athlete. He was winning in his competitions, and that bumped him up to the next level. And when he got to this next level, he was no longer winning everything like he was before. And so there's this comparison to who he used to be, right? So the same way I was saying here, when I was a high-level gymnast who used to compete very well. And so now if I have issues with certain types of movements, we end up comparing ourselves to who we were. And not only comparing ourselves to who we were, but who we think our parents and other people think we're supposed to be. And so if we have this idea of guilt to begin with, and we achieve worthiness of love through achievement, whether that's scholastic achievement or athletic achievement or looking a certain way, so that we can get our parents' attention or approval, well, we then end up creating, we then compare through that guilt to the way we were before to how we were now. And we're saying, okay, well, I was achieving and I was winning before, and now I'm losing now. There goes the guilt, right? And so that guilt comes up. You end up having the different scenarios that come up to bring your life back into alignment. So when that starts to come up and you're being inorganic in how you see yourself, in your own self-perception, in the scenarios that you're in, you're going to create a scenario like a car accident, like an injury, like something that gets you to recognize what the energy I was embodying is not the energy that my soul is telling me to embody. And for him, that catalyst was a car accident with his coach. And so what he attributed that to is he lost a lot of trust in his coach. So his coach was driving, and I think they were on their way to a squash match. When he was 14, he got in this accident, and he considered his coach his mentor, his protector. He was really, the impression I get was that his coach was really close to him. He looked up to his coach because his parents were always fighting. His athletics were a safe place for him. And if his athletics and his athleticism and his achievement there gave him value and worthiness, well, suddenly his worthiness of love is taken from him by this car accident, by what he perceived someone he trusted. So he trusted his coach, he trusted his mother to be nurturing and to be supportive and to be a protector, but she was never there as a protector. She was always getting sick. She was always operating on disempowered mindsets. And then he had a coach who was saying, hey, level up this way. You're doing these awesome things. And then his coach betrayed him by not keeping him safe in the same way that his mother couldn't keep him safe. And so now he has this wound against the masculine aspects that he admired, that he looked up to, that he wanted to embody. And so he said, oh, this masculine mentor that I really look up to, that's not reliable either. So now what do I look up to? What do I use as a frame of reference? How can I grasp this so that I can actually embody as a man? And so at the same time, his parents are divorcing. And so he's going through the combination of his injury. So his parents are divorcing. He's feeling guilty because of the divorce. He's feeling guilty because his athleticism isn't where it's at. These are multiplying up. And then that's tied into the accident. And so all these things start to get taken from him. His parents are taken from him in a certain context. His coach is taken from him in a certain context. His body is taken from him in a certain context. And so now he's trying to figure out, okay, how do I show up now that all of these things that I counted on as my footholds have been taken from me? And because of this, his life was taken on a different route. He thought he was going to be an athlete. He thought he was going to do these things. He thought maybe he had this trajectory in mind that his parents wanted, but he got injured and his body started hurting. So he's led in a different direction towards becoming a physio, towards like working with all these folks. He was hoping to rescue him from his pain when his pain had nothing to do with how his body moved. It had to do with his underlying guilt. And so, and his underlying other beliefs and programs, it's not just guilt, but guilt plays a big role in this. When you have that guilt eats at your physiology and causes a lot of those injuries to start to happen. And it then he turns around and looks at these programs that he's been running. So he had, throughout his entire childhood, he had a mother who was unhappy and sick and tired. She was always desperate. And she put her son on this pedestal, that her son is the one who is the best thing she ever did. He's the most beautiful thing she ever created. He is this star in her life. He gets on this pedestal that is responsible for keeping his mother safe. And so he's always living in that underlying guilt that because I injured my mother during a C-section, because my mother lives at this level, well, now I'm at this, I'm in a position where I am obligated out of guilt to be constantly helping my mother, and attached to that in a certain way, out of that obligation and guilt. And he then becomes a physical therapist. So now he's rescuing other people from their pain out of his own guilt of not enoughness, right? He couldn't rescue his mother. He wasn't enough to rescue his mother. And now he's got to be enough for his clients. He's got to make sure that he's doing the right movements and the right information and creating the right results in them to be worthy of love, to be worthy of validation, to be worthy of appreciation. And then what ends up happening, most likely, I don't know a lot about your relationships, but my guess here is that you end up taking the savior role into your relationships. And so the savior role shows up in your relationships where maybe initially in a lot of your relationships, you saw women who were either they embodied the masculine, so they were high energy, they were out doing stuff and they were exciting and you were following their excitement, or they mirrored your mother where you had to come in and save them from what they were feeling. And so either they had pain or they had emotional pain that you happened to be able to help, and you came in and kind of rescued them from that. And both of them can come from that same underlying program and that same underlying unworthiness program. Let's see. And then, you come into your relationships, that rescue program, that underlying guilt, and then you stayed in that 5-year relationship that you were in. So you were in a 5-year relationship and you said yes to moving in with the person before you were necessarily ready for it. And so at that time, you had other things, maybe there were other things you wanted to do. Maybe you actually did want to move in with the person, but there were other programs running around commitment that you were afraid of. And so there are other commitment versus fear of commitment versus, all these different nuanced layers that start to build out of that underlying guilt that you feel. So if you feel guilty, you'll feel like you are betraying somebody if you want to leave them. If you feel guilty, you're more likely to stay in a relationship a lot longer than you really should. If you feel guilty and you feel disempowered, you're most likely going to say yes to things that you would otherwise say no to. And so what we want to heal in this entire program isn't necessarily that, you're not that, this program that you're unlovable or you're unworthy unless you're hurt. It's that you have the beliefs of in unworthiness, in guilt, in these other programs that you need to really, that you need to reflect on. If you recognize, oh, well, maybe that was guilt. Now we need to redefine what guilt is to you. And so we can start to say, is guilt, am I really guilty for the way that I was born? Did I have any control over that? And am I in control of my mother's well-being or my partner's well-being or anyone else's well-being, really? And so we can start to reevaluate what areas do we have personal power over and what areas are we giving our sovereignty and our self-containment away to these other narratives that were imprinted when we were a child, and we continue to live those out throughout our entire life and into our other relationships. Well, then what happens? We start to recognize, oh, wait, I've been operating on guilt in all my relationships. Oh, wait, I've been operating on unworthiness. Oh, wait, I've been operating with my parents in terms of guilt in a lot of these areas. And so you're like, well, I'm not going to operate on guilt at all anymore. And so then you push everyone away and you go to the opposite extreme. And so it's really important to start to understand where we find a spectrum of interaction within these things, because it's really easy to say sovereignty. Okay, sovereignty, I'm on an island all by myself. And then you end up creating these universes where you can't connect to anybody because you create this higher truth than anyone else ever lives by, but you're not simultaneously holding the truths that exist for everyone else. And so that is a skill that's developed through this practice of seeing your truth and cultivating a truth that's empowering to you, while seeing, not only letting everyone else have their own truth by ignoring their truth, but seeing their truth proactively as well, even evaluating yours against it as a frame of reference, and allowing them to be in that and find ways to empower them to be their most empowered self within their belief structure. If that means guiding them to a change, you would show them through demonstration of alternative beliefs, not convince them that what they believe is wrong, because you will never do that. their beliefs have created their reality. Their beliefs have created through their energy system the results of how they see their body, the results of how they see their career, the results of how they see their partnership. You can't tell them what you see is wrong because it's what they see. So instead, you have to give them an opportunity to see something else, to think something else, and then compare the two in terms of which feels better, and empower them to realize they can choose one over the other just by choosing. Because a lot of times we think we need outside validation and outside permission and someone else to see us in that new choice and say, oh, you're doing that new choice, good job. Or you're showing up in this new way. Then you can do that. You have my permission. But it's never about an external permission. That's another program that we've been running from early on in our life, and it gets in our way from our ability to actually organically show up embodied in the best way that we can. Pierre, what do you have to say to all of that?
You just told my story very well. Yeah, of course. I don't know what to say. That's a lot.
Yeah, you'll probably have to rewatch it. That's okay. So the reason I know, one of the reasons that I know this, was able to tell that story that way, is because I have the same programs, right? You know, a lot of the clients in my groups, a lot of these things, you guys are all mirrors of me in different ways. And so these underlying programs and these things that you guys have gone through are things I have gone through, are things that I've been in. And so I understand those stories, and I also then understand, how do I step out of those? How do I change those interactions? And so that's kind of part of this game, is you keep adding breadcrumbs and you're like, okay, let me put a pin in that idea. Let me put a pin in that idea. And then you circle back later and you're like, oh, that's how all these things connect. That's why my relationships showed up in that way. That's why my body image shows up in that way when I'm interacting with people. That's why I have this fear of abandonment that shows up. And so we can start to really evaluate those in a much more empowering way. And like I said, it's always about evaluating our negatives. We always want to evaluate our negative beliefs. We want to evaluate what we believe happens if we don't do the thing we feel called to do. If we're feeling pushed to say yes to something we should say no to, what do we believe will happen if we do say no to it? And then we can trickle down that layer of information. We can say, well, if I say no to that, they won't like me. Okay, what happens if they don't like me? Is it realistic that they'll immediately never talk to me again? Well, that might be the extreme, but I've done these kinds of things before, and maybe they're just butthurt for a few minutes and they realized, oh wait, that was cool that you actually said no to something for once. I'm proud of you. You know, they might be proud of you, because at the end of the day, they mirror your own energetic output. And so if you are starting to serve and listen to your own inner guidance, and you're starting to shift these beliefs, and you're starting to do these things and operate on it, well, your outer world is going to reflect the outcomes that match that, and match what you believe those outcomes should be. So for example, if you've been guilty and you believe in guilt, and now you're shifting your belief in guilt, and you said, well, I'm going to say no to something that I would have yesterday said yes to, and me saying no, I still have this belief that if I say no to this, even though if I say yes, it's out of guilt. If I say no, they might be mad at me. Well, if I have that belief still, that is going to show up. They might get mad at you, right? Because you held that energy, you held that belief, and they're going to show it back to you. And so your work within that is to understand the spectrum, and to understand that when you shift that belief, it's not an immediate result. The old energy and the new energy coexist until one gains more weight than the other. And so one gains more energetic pressure than the other. And so when we shift a lot of these beliefs, it's not about ignoring the old belief. It's about actually processing it as much as you possibly can, so that it no longer holds negative energetic power against you. Because when you start to evaluate your money beliefs, when you start to evaluate your body image beliefs, or your beliefs around guilt, all of these different things that you can start to look at, and the more you examine it, and you're like, as an adult, I have no idea why I adopted that version of the extreme of that belief, but that's the thing that came to mind. And so the thing that I do when I evaluate a lot of this stuff is I start with a top level belief, and then I ask questions about what that belief means. So I believe in guilt. Okay, what is guilt? And then I write a sentence. What do I believe guilt is? And then based on that sentence, I say, okay, well, what do these words mean? What happens if I don't do what these words mean? And then I keep breaking it down into its more and more subtle and nuanced versions of that belief, so that I can actually say, oh, wait, a lot of this stuff actually isn't true for what my current experience is. It's just something I've held on to as true for a very long time. Okay. What questions do my coaching clients have? So I save this time, I have some new faces in here, so I try to repeat this every time, but I save this time to workshop stuff with my coaching clients. So if you are my coaching client and you would like to dig into some of the stuff I just discussed, or if you'd like to discuss any of the stuff that's been coming up this week, you absolutely can. And everyone else is welcome to listen in and learn from these things, because I think we all share very similar programs around all this stuff, or at least you can give us breadcrumbs to it. So if you have something you want to share.
The mother guilt is a very, very strong. Yes. Like I super resonate with a lot of that story, 1,000,000,000%, and see so much of that. So I'm sure that a ton of people here do too. That's why I have not been stopping you for questions. What's up? I know there's a lot of stuff coming up, and it has been coming up this week.
Let's see. What did I write about that?
It wasn't quite super related, but I was wondering if you could kind of lay out the difference and kind of where they're stored, the difference between like trauma, program, and belief, the differences between them, and kind of how they affect you. Because you mentioned to me that I was mixing programs and beliefs.
So
like around
there's a lot of different words for the same thing. So when we look at and evaluate what is trauma, what is conditioning, what is subconscious programming, what is a belief, all of these more or less are the same thing. They are a symbolic structure that is both imprinted in our limbic system and in the energetic structures around our cells, in our cellular consciousness, that then changes how energy flows through our body. And so when we look at these beliefs are going to determine, if you remember kind of the circuit analogy that I've been using the last couple of weeks, these beliefs are going to put energy in a certain frequency of information. And so when we understand there's a lot of frequencies of information that coexist in our second chakra, in our fifth chakra, in our fourth chakra, and they all serve different roles. Well, we understand that these beliefs are going to change how the energy flows from our cellular consciousness, which is influenced by our first energy center. We say, well, our cellular consciousness is the base anchor point for a lot of these traumas and programs. So that cellular consciousness then gets a structure around the water around the cells. And that water structure is a symbolic structure that influences how light and energy flows into and out of the cell. And as that energy is altered, the telepathic communication between cells is changed. Now, the actions that those cells take then turns into a different manifestation process. Now, energy flow through the body changes. Now, when energy flow through the body changes, the lymphatic flows through the body change. Now, when we start to understand the different beliefs and how they might be tied to different organ systems, we can start to say, okay, well, when we see energy flow being interrupted in the kidney, or we're seeing energy flow being interrupted in your liver, or in your stomach, or in your small or large intestine, or in your lungs, or in the throat, all of these different areas or reflex zones give us an indication of the types of emotions that are not flowing through you organically. So if we use the physical body signals, let's say we don't know the beliefs, like we don't know the programs, but we have physical symptoms. So if we have physical symptoms, maybe we have kidney issues or liver issues or stomach issues. Well, we can look at the emotions like simply by saying liver emotions. You can literally Google that. And so you can look up the emotions that are tied to the liver as a really baseline idea of, okay, this person has been having, they have temper and anger issues. So that's why they're having gallbladder issues. And so you start to understand where these emotions map to the body, and you can rewatch the body organ emotion mapping session to get another overview of that. And I'll talk more about it when I talk about the specific organs as we kind of continue that series in weeks to come. But we can start to say, okay, so this person is having these physical pains, or they're having these physical symptoms. Well, the more we can understand about how the body is interrelated and no system works alone, we can start to understand that we have beliefs about how our body should look. We have beliefs about what we're eating. Those are surfacing on the surface. We have beliefs around the emotions that we're feeling and what those are and what they should be and how they should flow. And so we need to evaluate those emotions. We also have color puncture tools that we can use to bring to the surface some of that information. And so now we start to tie together the fact that, okay, there's an energy that isn't flowing correctly through these different areas of the body. We have ways of at least temporarily moving that energy, whether through visceral organ work or lymphatic work or color puncture. And we get to move that energy a little bit. As that energy starts to surface, we then have our rational mind to be able to process the information that comes up as a result of that. And that's a case-by-case basis. No human is exactly the same. We might operate on similar emotions. We might operate on similar beliefs. But the way that those piece together has a lot of variables in terms of how those start to surface. So we have two different directions that we can go. If we listen to how someone speaks, and the words that they use when they talk about certain things that they care about, whether it's their body or their money or their relationships, the words that they choose to use and how they choose to talk about it gives us a really good indicator of what they believe that thing should look like. And when we start to understand what that thing should look like, we can ask, well, why should it look that way? And what, and weighing the different belief programs that might be connected to the fact that they're saying they've taken for granted that it should be this, when it doesn't need to be taken for granted necessarily, and reevaluated so that they can look at it in a more empowered state. Now, as we start to be aware of that, that means we have the responsibility of being more aware of what our body is doing. We have that personal responsibility of understanding our energy, our emotions, our physical body, our organ systems, and how all of those interrelate. And if we are just saying, well, I'm going to ignore all my organs until I get sick, and then when I'm sick, I'll let a doctor fix it. Well, then we're not taking into account the subtle energies that are influencing that and the beliefs that are influencing that from the beginning. And then we're waiting until we're way down into the disease state before we start to actually evaluate and remedy the situation. So the goal eventually is to improve our regulation circuit, to improve how we can actually have a better frame of reference, which means the frame of reference is improved by reevaluating the beliefs. The regulation circuit gets faster by catching the signals sooner, and being able to reevaluate and reestablish and look at these things. You're like, okay, well, I'm seeing this thing change in my body. Well, what could cause those changes? Is it my beliefs that believe it should look like this, or that this, is it my beliefs about the food that I'm eating? Maybe I am telling myself one thing, but believe another. And so those conflicting beliefs are causing my body to manifest in a certain way. Am I seeing organ issues that I can just, through my own knowledge, track to other things? And so you can start to reevaluate that. If we're looking at our clients, it's very easy to get lost in saying, oh, I need to put all the puzzles together. If I don't know every single puzzle that exists, I won't be able to help the next client. And that's not true. You learn to help your clients by understanding your clients are going to be a mirror of you in some way. And so whatever client that shows up to you is teaching you something about your own perception. And if you have that client show up and that client is asking to improve this thing, well, they're showing you your beliefs about that thing, and they're showing you their beliefs about that thing, and they're also giving you a lot of information that you can examine and look at them as a human. Because if all you look for is a formula that says, okay, let me just plug this human into this formula, and if they have this formula, I'm going to have an outcome that's the same every time, and because of that, I can just follow that, and I can not have to think or worry about any of those things. But the truth is, you trying to create a formula gives you something to worry about. It gives you an unworthiness that you create in your interactions with your clients. So the better option is to trust that you will always know enough for the client that you're about to work with. When you work with that client and you're brought with an information or a segment of data that you don't know how to process yet, you process it based on what you can already do, and then you reevaluate what that was so that the next time you're faced with that information, you can react in a more empowered state. You have more data, you can create more solutions based on that data. You can't precognize something you don't know yet. And you can't come up with a puzzle to put together if you don't know what pieces are going to be given to you by the client. And so if you try to create this rigid formula because you're like, well, I'm not enough, I'm not secure enough in who I am, and so I need this rigid formula so that even if I'm not enough, this rigid formula always works. I can believe in this rigid formula, and because I have that, my clients will be happy. And you're taking the human out of that equation, and it's really important to put the human back in that equation so that when you interact with them, you're actually listening to who they are rather than listening to this system that is based on old, outdated beliefs potentially, right? And so we can do a lot to start evaluating what we're eating. What do we believe sugar does to our body? Do we believe that sugar is our number one fuel source, but we also believe that it's poison? Can we start to reevaluate those beliefs and into a way that's much more empowering to us? Can we start to look at different types of movement, not as one being better than the other, but all of them being different tools that you can use through you to help you achieve your clients' goals? One of the things that I went back to doing much more over the last week, obviously I've taught a lot on mobility, I've taught a lot on spirals, I've taught a lot on functional movement and moving pain-free. And there's this huge, really strong belief in the movement world, created by mobility coaches, created by functional training coaches, all of these things, that non-functional training is dangerous and bad for your body, or if your body is not prepared properly, your body will not be safe doing any kind of movement. And so they say your body's not safe. And you feel, okay, from the default, my body is overloaded with toxins it can't handle. And in movement, it's never safe. So I have to be super careful all the time. It's very at risk of injury if I ever do anything wrong. And so what happens? You attract injury, you attract illness, you attract all these things. And so it's really important to examine, when you look at tension, when you look at stress, tension and stress go hand in hand. When you create a lot of tension in the body and stress, what are those things doing? Stress and tension are a creative catalyst towards health. They are your body saying you're under strain and we're going to push you towards being healthy. And so what we want to understand is that if we're always creating stress, we're creating this environment that tells your body you are not safe and you are not healthy. And so part of this is to understand that there's not one right transmission line through the body. And if we start to say, okay, there's only one right transition line or only a couple of right transition lines and all of them are causing damage, well, we've just programmed a lot of people, even though they're doing functional movement, to believe that their body is not intelligent, that their body is not safe, that their body is not capable. And so by you coming as a functional coach and you saying, I'm going to help you be capable in your body, I'm going to help you feel safe, but I'm going to tell you all the ways that you're unsafe doing what you used to do. And so now these coaches are like, or these clients are consciously are like, oh, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. I need to prepare my body so I don't hurt anymore. Maybe I've been doing all these things and my body's been hurting because I wasn't prepared and I wasn't ready. And so then they start creating all this tension and all these things that say, okay, we're going to create safety. We're going to create artificial safety in the body by generating all this tension, by generating all this strain. And that's going to generate the opposite of what you as a coach are trying to create in your client, which is physical autonomy, which is safety in the body. And so if you come from the position that one type of movement is better than another, then you are already creating unsafety in the environment that you're trying to cultivate. So for me, what I did the last week was I went to an old bodybuilding workout that I used to do years and years and years ago. And it was way more volume than I'm used to. And it was conventional bilateral lifts, heavy, conventional, high repetition, all this stuff that the functional movement world tends to say is dangerous for the body. And what I'll tell you is it felt great. I'm sore as can be since I'm not used to that, but it felt great. My body felt great after the workout. My muscles felt great and hydrated. All of those things felt as good or better than my functional movement, immediately invalidating all of those other beliefs that I held around those types of movement being potentially dangerous. And that's not because I prepared myself in any way. My ankles, I couldn't run to save my life right now because of how just the ankle injuries that I've had and the amount of time it takes to teach them how to be strong enough eccentrically. Now, if I'm constantly saying, oh, my body's not safe, I'm training all these ways to keep my body in the right alignment and to make sure that all these things are healthy. Well, guess what? When I go to run, my feet say, you're actually not stable, even though you are trying to be stable because you've just programmed your belief system to say you don't have stable footing no matter what you do, because that's what all of these gurus are saying in terms of movement. So our work in this is to also recognize what our body is doing. When our body is reacting to stress, so if I'm massaging somebody and I push into their abdomen and they have a limbic response, which is to guard, that tension is a self-protection mechanism. In the same way, the tension you make when you go to exercise is a self-protection mechanism that you feel because your body doesn't feel safe and you don't believe your body is smart enough to move things without your conscious mind overwriting what it knows how to do organically. No baby or infant needs to think about where to activate its muscles to do acrobatic movements. No baby needs to think about creating muscle tension in order to squat up and down. It doesn't need to think about its knee positions. It doesn't need to prepare its joints in any way. It's a human adult who has been told your body is not safe and it is dangerous and it doesn't know what it's doing. It is unintelligent. It is going to completely change how you interact with movement. And so our work within this is to start to say, oh, wait, I recognize that. I'm not trusting my body in these positions. I'm saying, oh, well, if I don't create tension here when I go to do this reciprocating press, or I go to do a squat and I don't brace my core the correct way, I'm guaranteed to injure myself. Well, that mindset in general causes you to be more likely to injure yourself just because of the belief structure becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense. So what did Scott say? So Scott said, I was literally just on a bike and I've been taking it so easy to make slow progress and protect my body, but I used to really enjoy pushing myself. And that was when I was stressed and not well nourished. Why can't I push myself now? So I just went super hard and it felt great. I've been doing work, but feeling so restricted because of that belief in safety. Exactly. And so the reason I'm saying this now is because I held that, right? I went through that journey. And it's part of why I don't push, my spirals or my functional movement stuff anymore. It's not that it doesn't have value. It's not that it's not really good information, but I don't like pushing things that I don't believe in. Or that I don't use myself. It's not that I don't do that mobility work still. I still do because I think it feels good and I think there's a purpose for doing that. But I also don't hold the belief that stretching is going to hurt your body unless you believe that stretching is going to hurt your body. Because there's plenty of folks who prove that wrong. But if someone's doing yoga and they're constantly feeling unsafe in their body and they're constantly feeling that their body is inadequate, well, guess what happens? Your body develops certain tensions to self-protect it, and you start to have injuries, and you start to have hypermobility, and you start to have all these inconsistencies with how your body operates and listens to you. And so there's a lot of aspects of how we move and how we see ourselves. And if we feel safe in our body, if we feel safe in our movement in the way that we're exercising, well, then our physical body is going to look the part of what we believe safety looks, security and safety looks like. If we feel insecure and we're always afraid of hurting ourselves, and we're always super timid because we're afraid if we go too hard, we're going to pull a muscle or we're going to injure ourselves. Well, immediately what happens? Our body, we not only make choices about our movements that are not what the child self would necessarily do, but we automatically create movement restriction that we wouldn't otherwise have if we didn't have those underlying beliefs. All right. What do you have to say to that?
That was really good. One thing that you talked about was about how we think we need all these like programs or have to have like the perfect program for the client. One thing that came up with a client I just added on was we talked about me helping her with her like shoulder pain and back pain. And then one insecurity I had that came up was like, how can I promise her that I can help her, you know, overcome this? Like there's no guarantee, even with all I know, that I could help her overcome this pain. I know part of it is that it's not my like necessary job to do that. But
so did she come to you saying, I need you to guarantee you will fix this? Or like, what was the language she used when she communicated that desire?
no, it's just that she's had this problem for a while. And so I talked about we could, you know, I could help her work through it to overcome it.
Let's look at something real quick. So, because Pierre, I think, gave this example too. And a lot of people do this. They'll say, you know, they had this injury and then they went to a series of chiropractors and physios and doctors and got PRP, and they did all these treatments that were supposed to fix their body, but the injury keeps recurring. And so they come to you. And each time they go to a new practitioner, they went from a physio to chiropractor. They went to this chiropractor hoping the chiropractor would be it. And the chiropractor showed up being like, I'm sure I can be it. I'm sure I can fix this for you. Did it work? Did it not? Right? Sometimes it works for people, sometimes it doesn't. So they went to the next practitioner. And so it did the same practice. They said, I really want you to rescue me. And the practitioner was like, I'm guaranteed to be able to fix this. I'm going to take the personal responsibility for you being successful in this and the results, right? And so now you show up and you are literally no different than them. You just have a different skill set. You might know more, you might actually be successful, but that doesn't mean you're better or different from them. It means you're in the same signal path for her to be evaluating. And you want to recognize that so that you don't put so much pressure on yourself that is self-imposed. So your work is like, if you haven't designed and decided who you want to be to your clients, if you are trying to be all things to all of your clients, if you're trying to fix every issue they come up with, like if you say, well, I'm helping them with, you know, physical aches and pains, and then you extrapolate to a level 1,000, you're saying, I'm going to help with physical aches and pains, and I'm going to help with organ issues, and I'm going to help with digestion, and I'm going to help with nutrition, and I'm going to help with all these things. Well, you have to also be clear in terms of that agreement with the client and your understanding of all those layers and how you're going to interact with them in that way as well. And you also have to understand where your work ends and where their work begins. Because if you are coming here out of guilt and your need to be good enough by giving them a large enough transformation or a tangible enough transformation or healing the shoulder and getting a testimonial back as a confirmation that you healed the shoulder, then you have to understand first that you only have the tools that you have, and you only have the awareness that you have when you work with them. So that if you were not enough and you weren't good enough as you were, you would have different things mirrored to you at that moment. You're not going to get a client where, you know, you're not going to get a client as a movement coach who needs heart surgery, right? So understand the clients that do show up to you are matching your energetic output, or they wouldn't show up. If she is showing up with that shoulder issue, see yourself in them, because there's two things that happen in this game. So let's say that you're a fitness coach, and as a fitness coach, you gained a little bit of weight, and you're saying, well, if I'm a fitness coach, why would anybody hire me if I gained a little bit of weight? They're seeing who I used to be. If they see who I used to be and they see who I am now, they're going to judge me against that. And if they judge me against that, they're going to see me as not good enough, and they wouldn't hire me as a coach. Well, let's say that somebody is hiring you to move pain-free, and you are here to help them with pain. Well, if you're somebody who has gained a little bit of weight and you're worried about your weight gain, but your transformation is pain, then you're focusing on the wrong aspect of your being in terms of your ability to help them. The better aspect would be, I'm helping you with pain. Have I removed that pain in myself? And then that initially is still a disempowering belief, because then you get stuck saying, well, I haven't removed this from this pain keeps coming back for me, even though I can fix it a little bit, or this pain keeps coming back. Maybe I'm not qualified to help them fix their pain, which isn't true, because we understand the multidimensional and multi-layered aspects of how that pain surfaces, having nothing to do with the movements that you necessarily teach your client. It's not because you're a bad coach that you sometimes have that pain, even when you're trying to fix somebody else's pain, because you have your own programs and symptoms and beliefs that were imprinted from your parents that you had no control over, that you may not have seen yet, that could be showing up in the form of that pain. That doesn't make you less than. That doesn't make you insufficient. And so we want to recognize that when we go to interact with our clients, because our clients are, like I said, they're showing up as a mirror of us. And if we can really accept that at the most fundamental level, we can show up empowered to interact with them based on the information we currently have. And they, in real time, will give us the feedback that we need to help them, right? You have a huge vocabulary of things to do to help with shoulders. And you start with the first thing. You see how that worked, and you go to the next thing. And you see how that worked, and you go to the next thing. Because you realize there are things that you can do that will at least give them some relief. You may not fix their pain in one session. And if you make promises that are beyond what you've ever done before, meaning you make a promise that someone can come in for one session and all of their bodily ills are fixed, well, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, because you don't actually believe that that's true yet. Now, once you believe that that's true, then you can do that. But you want to make sure that you believe that first, so that when you bring somebody in to create that transformation, you're all in. You're invested in yourself. You trust yourself. And you're like, okay, I can create this transformation because now I've done it. I've proven it to myself. But if that's where you start, having never proven it to yourself, you're going to conflict with your own beliefs in that sense. So don't need that. You don't need to be healing people in one session. You set up a program with somebody who said, okay, you have shoulder pain or you have hip pain. Well, to be honest, it's not just your shoulder that's the problem. We're going to have to look at your hips. We're going to have to look at your feet. We're going to have to look at your spleen. We're going to have to look at your shoulder. We're going to have to look at your liver. And all these things are going to be done. We may not get through all of them in one session. So we're going to just check stuff off the list and see what helps and what doesn't. And you're going to have to expect to be here a couple of times so that we can get through that stuff and see what works. And once we find something that works, then we can run with it. But I have a lot of tools, and I know with a lot of tools, we can start to dig into it. But I'm not going to promise to transform you overnight. There's a lot of layers to this that are both emotional, that are physical, that are based on you as a human, that even if I have the perfect tools, may not work until we get to the human element that connects you to what you're experiencing. And you can then start to communicate with them as a human from your own humanness, as an understanding that they're having a pain, as an understanding that you're going to help them with that pain because you have tools, and you're going to do the best job that you can with the information that you have. And when you get more information, you will keep growing your practice and expanding it and being more effective. But you can't be more effective from day one. You can't be if it's the first day you've ever picked up gymnastics, you're not going to be good at gymnastics from the first day you ever stepped on the floor. You're not going to be good at any sport from the first day you stepped out on the floor. You might be really athletic and be able to pick things up quickly. You might be really intelligent and be able to pick up information quickly. But at the same time, you're not going to be an expert at it from day one, nor do you want to be. Part of the fun is developing your practice. And through that development of that skill, through that development of your body, you gain passion in what you're doing. And a lot of people look for passion before gaining the skill, which is why they start to they're like, oh, well, I tried this thing and it didn't work and I didn't feel passionate, so I'm going to move on to the next because that wasn't it. But the truth is, we don't get passionate by falling in, the passion doesn't fall into our lap. The wisdom doesn't fall into our lap. It comes from us practicing and getting good at something, and then embodying that skill and trusting our skill. And as we do that, we get more out of our way and are able to show up embodied in that energy without the self-doubt energetic that is enmeshed in that. Is that helpful, Eric?
Yes, for sure. And so another thing that came up while you were talking was that I think one of the pressures was like, she signed up for like 10 sessions or 10 weeks basically. And then we set goals. So it was like, okay, by the end of the 10 weeks, shoulder 0 out of pain. So each month it's like go from 7 to whatever, 5 to 3. So it's like, I have that, like, that's the objective, but I have no idea if I can hit that, exact.
So here's the thing. Here's what I would reframe for her, because this will be really good for her.
Like,
And
I know she can heal a lot during that time, but I don't know if that specific.
that's not what it's about. Healing the shoulder is not why she's there with you. That's not the goal. That's not really the goal, right? Like if she sets the goal to have 0 pain in her shoulder, we want to understand, what does 0 pain in her shoulder allow her to do, and what does it allow her to be? What does it allow her to show up as that she's restricting from her life? And then work to allow her to be that, rather than work focusing on the pain in the shoulder.
Subtext.
Mm-hmm. Always look at the subtext, because the thing is, if you promise to say, I'm going to fix your shoulder, well, what if she was missing an arm? Like if she was missing her entire arm and you're like, I'm going to teach you how to throw. You're like, well, you're making a promise that you don't have control over. What you can do is, let's say she's missing an arm and she wants to be able to carry her burdens. and so can you help her carry her load in spite of her missing arm, and teach her a new way to carry it without needing to generate an arm for her, right? And so when we can see our human in our client, we can see that she's not just coming for shoulder pain. She's coming because that shoulder pain inhibits her from living the other things in her life. And so can you help her see the emotional ties to that? Can you help her see the things that she actually desires to do? Can you, as a coach, find out what those things are, so that you can help her focus on that while you fix the shoulder, so that little by little she gets to play with her kids. She gets to do the things that I think Eric can generate arms too. And if you get to that point, do that, right? Do that. Believe in yourself. But at the same time, we also want to be at our present point of power. From that present point of power, we can have desire for what we want those practices to look like. And what we do is we're honest with ourselves about where we are, accountability, and we are okay with where we are. And then we set a trajectory. We set a direction that we want to grow into, or step into, or an experience we want to have, whether that's an experience we want to have with our clients, or it's an experience we want to have because of our clients, right? So we get more clients to make money, to be able to do a thing that we want to do. Find out what that is for you, so that you know why you're even interacting with your clients. If you're only interacting with your clients because you're afraid of running out of money, well, the energy that you interact with your clients with is always going to be a not enough, is always going to be an insufficiency in some way. And so the more you can understand, well, what is the actual goal that I actually want money for? Do I want money because right now I'm barely living month to month and I want to be able to put food on my table? Or am I actually wanting to have a certain type of adventure? Am I wanting to have a certain home that I want to live in? And what does that look like? What is in there? What does that feel like? Can I start to draw out that destination as my why? So generate from my present point of power what it is that I would like it to look like, and define it with as much definition as you can, and keep adding data to it as you find data, and take things away and add new things as you re-evolve it. But keep that image there in the future, so you have a why behind what, you're not just doing this to make money to get by right now. That's a dead end for your growth. So aim higher, so that this can be solved as a result of aiming higher. And so as you do that, you'll be able to have a frame of reference. You're like, okay, I'm here in my present point of power. This is where I want to go. Now I see where that is. And I have support systems and a coach and all of these things that can help me fill in these blanks. And now I can start to say, well, what is a trajectory I could use to cross this threshold? Now let me take actions that step me from point A to point B. And then that gives me a new frame of reference for this trajectory, and I refine, and then I get a new step. And so instead of saying, okay, how do I jump from here to here? And your soul is like, I've never jumped that far before. I don't think I can right now. I barely afford rent. And so you sit there wondering what the miracle mechanism is to get you there, instead of recognizing the masculine embodiment that requires you to say, okay, what am I feeling? What am I seeing in reality? What is my accountability here? Okay, what is the action that I can take to solve this illness, this position, this thing that I don't want to be in? All right, so I have an action that can step me forward. Took an action that gave me information. Now that choice that I made, that information that I made, whether it's you showing up in a different embodiment, whether that's you trusting yourself in a new way, all of those things can really be very empowering for you to kind of say, oh, wait, I've been sitting here just trying to work for work's sake. And now I actually said, well, actually, why am I working? Why am I teaching this stuff? Who am I doing this for? And then taking back and saying, okay, well, who am I? And what do I want to be? You know, and what is my soul and what is my purpose? Because my purpose is not what I do. My purpose is who I am. And so you want to understand that what you're doing for work is not your purpose. That is what the mind control in society wants you to believe. We have a purpose of being, not a purpose of doing. And through that, we can create who we want to be and what we want to do out here. And then we can create a position here. And then now we have a line between 2 points that we can start to use as our trajectory, to make steps, to actually say, to get energetic inspiration that tells us, what do I need to put in place to get there? What do I need to build? Instead of just building for the sake of building and working for the sake of working, right? And so that really can change how quickly you can grow and where you grow towards and how far you grow, because you've established what you want your satisfaction level to be, right? Because most of the time, like in our body image, in our sexuality, in our lifestyle, in these things, we haven't ever discerned what we want satisfaction to be. What are we satisfied with? What level of life experience and emotional state and energetic do we want to embody on a daily basis? Do you want to live a life where, do you really want $1 million? Or do you just believe that having $1 million will allow you to stop working for work's sake? Well, can you stop working for work's sake without having $1 million? Absolutely. So we want to then understand a better trajectory there. So if you're asking for $1 million, what do you want that $1 million for? Do you want that $1 million to be able to buy a house? Okay, you have this amorphous idea of what that house looks like. What do you want that house for? Is that because you don't have a house now? Or is it because there's something in your house that you can't do that you could do in a different house? And so you start to look at those things, and then you start to solve those individual problems. And then you start to build your life in that capacity, and then you expand it as you push against those walls, and you start to solve those underlying problems. You're like, okay, why do I want money? Why do I want this relationship? Why do I want this career? Well, they're all solving a problem, or you believe they're solving a problem. And if you're more accurate at your definition of what that problem is and where you want that trajectory to take you, well, then the choices that you make in your business, the choices that you make in the projects that you say yes to, the choices that you make in the clients that you say yes to, all of these become more defined in what you speak to those clients, who you speak to, and where you let that lead you off to. In the same way, if I'm taking time off of social media, why am I posting? Why am I sharing all this stuff? If no one is on this planet as someone who is rescuing anyone, if we are all here to host a frequency in our own lives, meaning like if there's no way that I could reach 7 billion people and there's no reason to reach this many people, it's very unlikely that one person is chosen to have a very specific role in humanity to serve this very specific purpose. And if people don't see this information that they're going to be in trouble in some way, well, you're bottlenecking your own expression. You're bottlenecking your ability to show up in other capacities because you put this huge burden on yourself to be this higher consciousness, to be this this type of being that isn't quite what your soul is asking you to be, which is why you feel that conflict in your operation. And so for me, I took time off of social media because it was important for me to recognize that one, I still make money whether I'm posting or not. Two, I have value as a human, regardless of teaching, regardless of what I'm sharing, regardless of what I'm posting, and regardless of whether I'm helping people. There is a balance between service to self and service to other people. And we want to be in the middle of that so that we have a rhythm that is constantly refilling itself or constantly full so that you're interacting in the right organic way. At the end of the day, when you serve yourself, you are serving others. When you serve others, you are serving yourself. When you give to others, you're giving to yourself. And when you take from others, something is taken from you. So we want to understand that we are all energetically connected in terms of how those exchanges happen. And so if you're operating on a not enoughness, on a scarcity that causes you to say, I need to get more clients or I need to do these things, well, you are effectively giving from yourself without taking back in the energetic that leads you towards the expression that you want to experience. So you have to then say, well, I'm getting all these clients because I want to make more money. Well, why do you want to make more money? You want to make more money because you want to have, maybe it's at its simplest, you want to have this feeling of security. You want to have this feeling of safety. You don't want to live month to month. Well, let's say now you're living 3 months to 3 months. Can you cultivate that feeling of security? Can you cultivate that feeling of safety in your life by reevaluating the parts of your life that you are imagining are unsafe? And through that process, you can start to cultivate safety separate from your financial environment. And that then regulates that chakra one subconscious cellular consciousness to be more stable. That stability allows you then to embody the emotional aspects in your second chakra that deal with sexuality and abundance and all of those other aspects of emotion that get jumbled up when you are trying to make money and abundance out of a scarcity standpoint. So if you are operating on not enoughness, your root is already doesn't have a point of focus. It doesn't have an identity. It doesn't have a singular point that you are like, I'm gung-ho going to be this character. And so when you pick that point and you stabilize your circuit to just choosing that and practicing that choice, then you can start to really shift the other aspects of that circuit and the emotional body and the rational mind and its ability to process this information from a frame of reference that is much more empowering to you. It doesn't have that underlying haste or angst in your interactions. That's probably good. And so there's a lot of nuance there in terms of money, in terms of body image, in terms of career, in terms of those choices. And hopefully, as you guys hopefully you took some notes and you just wrote down certain concepts so that when you guys go back and maybe journal or you just go back and process some of this information, the thing we want to understand is that we always have access to our top level beliefs or our emotions. Those either one can be used to trace back to the belief. And we can then use that to trace the negative belief, which allows us then to reframe those things. And so now we have this kind of formula that we can use to begin shifting that, to begin practicing the new embodiment, to see, oh, am I showing up this way with my clients, or am I showing up in a different way? Or am I operating on a savior obligation in some subtle way? And then these things get more and more nuanced. You might fix it at this level, and then these same programs will show up at a more and more subtle level. And so we're constantly peeling those layers. There's more and more nuanced beliefs and programs that show up that as we shift those, it'll show up in our money, it'll show up in our relationships, it'll show up in our career, it'll show up in the words that we choose to use, it'll show up in how we feel, all of that kind of stuff. So a few more minutes left. If you guys have any quick questions from my coaching clients, you're welcome to ask. Was it not a quick question, Eric? Did you have a question?
Well, I was just asking the last 3 questions, so if anyone else wanted to go. But I just had thought of the money stuff because that's really relevant. Because I was taking kind of a break and going slow and wasn't showing up as much as at work and was having less clients. And now that I'm like choosing to kind of show up again and show up more fully, I'm trying to get more clients again. But I think partly with the idea that it'll help me with my money security. And then I can see some of those things coming up in my life with my mom asking me, like talking about how, oh, maybe that kind of job, you won't make enough money or it's not sustainable, or if you don't work full time, then you won't make enough money. And then also being concerned when I leave the gym at, before 5 p.m. or something like that, that there's that pressure on me. So I think I still hold those beliefs, but then I was trying to reframe being like, okay, well, Paul Check charges $700 an hour for his training, so he can make enough. Ryan doesn't work full time and he makes enough. So trying to like evaluate some of those negative experiences. But then I'm like, how do I get to that? It's like, do I need to train enough people to where I can start charging more organically?
It was not an instantaneous thing that I stepped into.
Yeah.
And that's important to always remember. And I imagine it wasn't even close to instantaneous for Paul Check either. It might have grown really quickly for him. Like when something grows, a lot of times in a business, it grows really, really quickly and exponentially. But reality is that if you have that scarcity or those programs that are running, we need to stabilize, not necessarily, it can be stabilized simultaneously, it could stabilize as a result of that growing, but we also want to understand where you are starting. So for you personally in that job, you might find that you have this fear of just depleting your cash because your mom has that same belief and you guys both are holding that. And so you need to show yourself that, one, you're not going to die if that money comes down a little bit. Two, you are capable of making more money than you spend. And three, even if you're making more money, you might find that, oh wait, me making more money didn't actually fix that underlying feeling. And so all of those things are important to learn. And then what we want to understand is that if you don't already have something in line that can create that type of lifestyle and income, what we want to understand is, what does that lifestyle look like? And why do you want it? And also, what does your current employment allow you to do to shift certain beliefs or to get you in line with that particular trajectory? Like for me, I had said that I was, when my electronics business crashed and burned, I managed a gymnastics gym. And that process of managing that gymnastics gym gave me an opportunity to fix my hemorrhaging of cash from basically bleeding out from the identity that I created as my old business went under. So that gave me that opportunity to shift from my money depleting to my money being stable, and then me having a little bit more money that I actually needed to make ends meet. Was I making a ton of money? No, but I had a little bit more money, and that created a stability that I could be comfortable, that I could exhale, that I didn't feel like I needed to work more than what was happening at the gymnastics gym. I was going to work, I was working, and then when I wasn't there, I didn't feel like I was obligated to work all the time because that created a stability that I needed financially. Well, as that existed, I had this little bit of financial stability. Well, I was able to then step out of that comfort zone again to grow again, which meant that I was able to then start doing a different type of coaching. I was able to do movement coaching. I was able to do mobility coaching. And then I started to coach at a couple of other gyms. And that built up a little bit, and I got a couple of clients on that side. Well, I had a couple of clients on that side that started to grow, and not as a perfect transition. Like I basically had taught a couple of folks in person, so I had a tiny bit of money, and that was part of why I was making more than what I needed to make ends meet. Well, then the gym dropped out, and I was forced to figure this part out. Well, as I was figuring this part out, having a couple of clients and a couple of gyms that I was teaching at, well, then I poured more energy into this, and I got more clients, and that grew, and that piece grew. And then I created stability in the fact that I was teaching a couple of classes a week, and I was making enough money with the clients that I had. And so I was like, okay, that's covered those, and I'm making a little bit more money than I need with the things that I'm doing. Okay, I can sit out by the pool when I'm not doing that. Well, then the process evolved again. As I started to do things, as I stopped teaching as much in person, I started to sell online programs Well, when I started selling online programs, I was like, well, how many online program sales would I need to do to replace my current income? And then then it was a number that was way beyond what I was used to making. And so there was an inhibition to that belief that showed up, because I was like, wow, I need to be making 3 sales a day, or I need to be making, you know, some absurd number of sales every month to be able to make the same amount of money. And it wasn't that it was an absurd amount of sales. There are plenty of people who get way more sales than that. 3 sales a day is like 0, right? And to me now, 3 sales a day is not very many, but it was a barrier to my belief system at the time. And so what I needed to do was start at a level that was realistic. I was trying to get those I was trying to get that much through my bank account so I could feel comfortable, instead of trying to find the comfort in allowing those things to shift. So through that process, I began taking on new clients, and I began shifting where I was making money. Well, I made some coaching clients that brought in this money that got me through this amount of time. And then I realized, oh, wait, that fell off the edge before I was ready to bring in new clients. And I learned lessons from that. Right. And so I kept having to shift those beliefs. I kept having to shift how I was operating that business. And then it grew into a purely online thing like I do now, and was able to just continue to structure it based on how I believed I wanted to live my life, which was, to not need to be working 9 to 5. So of course, what happened? I said, I don't need to work 9 to 5. I only really have to work with my clients on the weekends, and then a little bit through the chat. And then now through like my one-on-one clients and things that I meet with you guys. But for the most part, I don't have to work that much, not have to. So what happened? I was obligated by running that work program that had still been operating, that says you're not worthy, or you're not a good enough coach, you're not a blah, 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 if you're not working all the time and saving people and rescuing them and sharing all this information. So instead of me, feeling like I could relax and do whatever I wanted during the day, what was I doing? I was making posts, and I was posting on my stories all the time, and I was doing Q&As, and I was doing all these things that I had attributed, saying, well, if I'm not posting, I'm not making money. So I had that belief that had anchored in there. Well, I didn't need that either, because I could then shift those beliefs and say, well, I could be worthy whether I'm working or sharing or not. And if like I can get people to sign up for the places where they can actually receive the transformation that I want to give them. Whereas otherwise I'm just a meme account. I don't want to be a meme account. So how do I make sure that what I'm doing in my posts isn't just busy work for the sake of me running that same 9 to 5 program I was working before, but how can I live the relaxed life that I actually want to live, where I don't have to work all the time, where I can spend that time, whether it's researching, or it's just being, and maybe like being spontaneous. Maybe you want the money and you want that freedom because you want an opportunity to be spontaneous. Well, can you cultivate that spontaneity in your life already on a smaller scale and allow those things to grow? And so you have a lot of areas that you're like, well, I really have this desire for this kind of experience. Well, start at the level that you can already achieve that experience, and then start at the level you can achieve this experience, and start at the level you can achieve this experience, and then grow them independently, organically, through the catalysts that your life is already bringing you. Your life is already setting you up with opportunities to solve these problems based on the belief structures that you already embody. So you're already setting yourself up to make the money that you want to make by bringing in more clients. You might find that, oh, wait, me working 10 hours a day with 100 gazillion clients is actually not what I want to do. I thought it was, because I thought it was about the money. And then I realized, oh, wait, I made plenty of money, but I never have any time. And I made plenty of money, but I'm not doing any of the things I thought I wanted to do. Or I made plenty of money and my clients love me, but I'm not getting to walk my dogs outside and go on adventures and do these things. And so then you reevaluate. You're like, oh, wait, it actually wasn't about the money. I wasn't asking for this big pot of gold. I was asking for this experience. How can I get my life to provide me this experience? So I stopped pouring energy into the lack of money and into the experience that I want, and cultivating that, and then allowing my world to support me in that endeavor.
Yeah, perfect. Because I think I experienced when I was working less that wasn't right, because I was maybe at home and not. I was like, okay, yeah, maybe my experience was I just want more free time or something like that, or I don't want to be, because I did in the past, like, a year ago before the quarantine, working a lot and having a lot of clients, and that didn't seem that enjoyable. Being at the gym for 12 hours a day.
It might be enough to, like, you might even say, well, to live the lifestyle I want, I need, maybe you only need, like, maybe you're making, $3,000 a month and you only need to make 3,500 a month, right? You make that extra $500 a month by bringing on 1 or 2 clients or whatever it is that you do. And you're like, oh, okay, that's really all I needed. And now I can live the life that I wanted. I just thought it was this huge amorphous thing that I needed. I thought I needed 10,000 clients, or I needed this big program that sells a million copies of the program in order to be able to live the life that I want. But the truth is, no, you could live that now. You just have to find the space in your life to create it so that you can create those dynamics, so you can have that kind of experience and only work enough that you can fill that cup, or build the systems that make you money so you don't need to work that can fill that cup.
Yeah. But I think it was kind of showing too that the thing I wanted wasn't the free time almost. It was something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I still wasn't cultivating that. Like maybe it was like connection with people, or, doing something like that. And so it wasn't like the money scarcity thing that I was.
It could,
that I was
so
wanting.
like loneliness, loneliness is a stronger belief in loneliness than affection, right? So loneliness and affection are on the same spectrum. And so if you're seeking that connection, if you're seeking connection, if you're seeking not to feel lonely, a lot of times you believe in disconnection. And so you're disconnected from yourself. And you also feel like you are missing affection, which means you are being hard on yourself versus affectionate towards yourself. And so when you start to be affectionate towards yourself, and you start to be caring about yourself, and you start to, even just speak to yourself lovingly, a lot of those kinds of things can be shifted as well. You start to realize what you're actually seeking for. It's not, I need to be around all these other people that I need. It's that I'm seeking affection. I'm seeking to feel connected with myself. Well, I gave that to me. Now I don't need that. Now I can create something completely different within that container. I can connect to people organically rather than sitting right next to them and feeling lonely, right? There are plenty of people who have relationships who are like, I have a relationship, but I'm sitting next to them on the couch and I feel lonely sitting next to them. And so that's just as possible. It's not the existence of another that makes you feel connected or affectionate or not lonely. It's what are you able to cultivate within yourself first, and then express towards other people or whatever that is, and practice expressing it. And that's why it's difficult, right? That's why it doesn't just show up and you're like magically having that type of interaction with people. It's because you feel like you're not connecting with them, or you feel like you're not being kind enough, you feel like you're not seeing them, because there are things within you that you are not seeing, that you're not being kind enough, that you're hard on yourself, but you should be kind to everybody else. And so there's a mismatch there that can be remedied, and then your interactions with people will change in that sense as well.
Yeah, I think I have like plenty of connection, but it was in certain, like I was thinking about this last night. It was like, it's almost like I want that, but I'm also pushing it away, like with the sovereignty thing and being like rebellious at work. It's like, okay, I'm asking for this, but I'm behaving in a way that's like pushing people away, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's what happens. We hold those two conflicting beliefs. We want a thing, and then we set ourselves up for failure that way out of, some egoic program really that ends up happening is it creates an identity, and that identity says that thing, we can't let that thing in, even though that's the thing that that is happening, or that is coming to us. I was laughing at Dave, so I lost my train of thought. So, all right, well, we're going long today, so that's probably pretty, I think we covered a lot of stuff today. Obviously, you guys are welcome to just keep rewatching this one and seeing what comes up as a result of it, and we can keep workshopping it a little bit too. Pierre, let me know how that stuff unfolds, if you start to evaluate that, and if that changes anything for you. I think that'll be pretty cool. And anybody else who's started to draw some of those connections and you want to see how I can map that out for you, I can do that for you as well. As long as you're in my coaching group, obviously. And you guys, like, if you're coming through this and you want to be able to workshop some of these things, or workshop them during the week, because we do a lot of this type of stuff during the week outside of these chats, you can certainly join in on that game. Like I said, I'm officially starting that in January, but we'll have a group mastermind kind of group that's going to be $250 a month that will be able to workshop this kind of stuff. So you'll be able to ask these questions and workshop your own experiences that way, and work on reframing those beliefs and empowering yourself in the same way that I've been doing with my clients, and in other ways, because we talk about different stuff every week. And
That chat is awesome. There's so much gold in there throughout the week, and it's
so if you're feeling called to
Yeah,
that, or you're
that's
thinking
cool.
about it, let me know and I can get you in there. You don't need to be a member of the archive to be a member of that chat, though you may want to if you are kind of behind on the archive, because there's a lot of really good stuff in there. You can also do both, which my coaching clients currently do. So a lot of options there. You can certainly send me a DM if you'd like, or you can obviously, my coaching clients can just message me and ask whatever questions you might have about that. And I will see you guys next week. All right, thanks, guys.